In this scene from Bad Reputation, the unfolding connection between Sarah and Andy becomes a remarkably tender and emotionally nuanced exploration of queer longing, self-recognition, and the way two young women, both technically adults but standing at the threshold of their futures, navigate desire, identity, and the hunger for someone who sees them clearly. And what makes this moment so resonant for lesbian and broader LGBTQ+ viewers is the way their story captures the specific experience of queer youth who have spent years performing versions of themselves for family, school, or expectation, only to suddenly collide with someone who inspires them to step outside their prescribed roles and toward their own authenticity. Because Sarah, with her pristine uniform, backpack, and carefully cultivated academic excellence, embodies the girl who has done everything right. She is the dutiful daughter, the perfect student, the one who listens, the one who behaves, the one who has learned how to be small, soft, palatable, and acceptable in a world that rewards girls for obedient brilliance but punishes them for wanting too much, feeling too much, or loving outside the bounds of heteronormativity. And later, when she slips on her headphones and chooses a punk song, the very opposite of her outward persona, it becomes an act of quiet rebellion, a tiny seismic shift toward who she really is and who she wishes she could be, signaling that beneath the polished exterior she is desperate for disruption, for intensity, for a life that is lived rather than curated, which will resonate intensely with queer women who remember having two selves, the one everyone else saw, and the one inside them clawing to breathe. Andy, by contrast, is Sarah's opposite, messy, raw, expelled, suspended, unfiltered, creative, and already uninterested in the systems that Sarah has worked so hard to succeed within. And her failure to graduate on time has earned her a reputation, the bad girl, the troublemaker, the lesbian delinquent, a label that both shields and exposes her, making her someone who has long since stopped trying to be admired, instead embracing the armor of indifference because it hurts less to be dismissed when you have already pre-dismissed yourself. And queer viewers may recognize the silent truth behind that posture. How sometimes failure or rebellion is not a lack of ability, but a refusal to conform to spaces that do not feel built for you, or a way of surviving the loneliness of being different by choosing the role that gives you at least some control over your narrative. When Andy sees Sarah walking past, the neat, bright girl she has quietly noticed from afar, they momentarily represent two worlds that rarely touch, the invisible queer longing of the high achiever and the unsteady queer confidence of the outsider. And Andy's decision to follow Sarah is not about conquest or bravado, but about curiosity and yearning, the magnetic pull towards someone who makes her feel something soft and new, and her small hesitation, the way she slows her steps to look at Sarah before catching up, mirrors a deeply familiar lesbian experience, the ache of wanting to know someone without knowing whether it is safe to want them. Meanwhile, Sarah's reaction to Andy, first mild surprise, then growing warmth, is its own queer journey. She is swept up not by a dramatic confession, but by the simple, radical experience of being seen by someone who isn't her teacher, her parent, or her academic rival. And Andy's presence pulls her out of her routine and into possibility, the possibility that life is more than achievement and the appearance of goodness. Sometimes it is about finding someone who makes you feel alive. Their conversation begins awkwardly, with Andy complaining about homeroom and trying too hard to sound tough, while Sarah listens politely, amused by the posturing, unsure how to bridge the gap between who she is expected to be and who she feels herself becoming in Andy's proximity. It mirrors how many queer women have navigated early crushes, hiding interest behind forced nonchalance, waiting for the other to signal safety, whispering to themselves, say something, anything, while terrified of being exposed. When Sarah asks about finals, the moment feels almost painfully relatable, the nervous, earnest attempt to keep conversation going when the emotional stakes feel higher than the words themselves. And Andy's sudden suggestion to take a shortcut, veering off the road, becomes a metaphor for the queer pivot, the choice to step outside the expected script and into something unknown and thrilling. And Sarah's brief hesitation, followed by her decision to follow Andy, reflects the aching desire to choose the life you want rather than the life you have been told to want. As they wander deeper off the path, Sarah becomes aware that this is no longer about getting to school, and that awareness blooms not into fear but into want. She likes this girl, likes how she feels around her, likes the unfiltered honesty that Andy carries like an unzipped jacket, and that feeling of being drawn to someone who reflects a part of you that you have never allowed yourself to name is something countless queer women will recognize. Their conversation deepens, brushing against hints of their inner lives, their upbringings, the contrasting pressures they carry, Sarah from expectation, Andy from dismissal. And together they form a portrait of how different queer girls can be shaped by the same culture in opposite ways. One overdisciplines herself to avoid scrutiny, the other stops trying because she was scrutinized no matter what she did, and yet both end up yearning for the freedom to be known. When Sarah casually asks whether Andy has a boyfriend, a question often used as a soft probe by queer women hoping for confirmation, Andy's chuckle and simple reply that guys aren't her type cracks the air open, relieving them both of the unspoken fear of misreading each other. And Sarah's laughter in return isn't nervousness anymore, but recognition and relief, because finally she is not the only one in the scene holding a secret. The queer tension between them, which has been quietly escalating, becomes not a forbidden desire but something deeply human and emotionally true. The experience of two women slowly, quietly, bravely stepping into honesty with one another. And instead of focusing on spectacle or sexualization, the story centers their connection as something rooted in emotion, curiosity, and the longing to be seen beyond stereotype. Andy, with her so-called bad reputation, symbolizes the countless queer women who were labeled troublemakers, rebels, or delinquents simply because they refused to shrink themselves, or because the world punished them for their difference before they even understood. Sarah, the good girl, symbolizes the queer women who excelled, performed, or assimilated as a form of self-protection, only realizing later how much of themselves they had muted to survive. Their kiss against the tree, then, is not the culmination of a taboo, but the culmination of visibility. Two adult young women standing in a liminal space between adolescence and adulthood, choosing, for perhaps the first time, to follow desire rather than expectation. And for queer viewers, especially women who grew up feeling out of place or hidden, this moment resonates as a reclamation of autonomy and joy. The scene also exposes society's discomfort with women expressing love for each other without being fetishized or reduced to stereotypes. Sarah and Andy's connection challenges the binaries that often define queer women in media: good versus bad, pure versus corrupt, feminine versus masculine, and instead allows them to exist as complex people drawn together not by rebellion, but by recognition. It highlights the pressure queer women face to justify their feelings, to minimize their attachments, to hide behind sarcasm or silence until they are absolutely certain they are safe, and the relief that comes when safety finally appears in the form of another woman's honesty. Their dynamic mirrors the real-world tension many queer women experience between who they have been told to be and who they want to be, and by choosing each other, if only for an afternoon. They choose visibility, they choose self-truth, they choose possibility. Ultimately, the scene is not about a bad girl seducing a good girl, but rather about two queer adults meeting at precisely the right moment, each offering what the other needs. Andy offering Sarah freedom, boldness, and authenticity, and Sarah offering Andy gentleness, curiosity, and the validation that she is worthy of love beyond her reputation. Together, they create a space where neither has to pretend, where desire can be honest, where connection is not something to fear but something to step toward. And in doing so, they show queer women watching that their own longing for connection, recognition, and emotional safety is not too much. It is human, it is valid, and it deserves to be seen.